It's crazy how much stuff that North Americans have. We have a lot of things: shoes, clothes, cars, homes, TVs, boats, video games, decor around the house. The list goes on. We have a lot of stuff, but for some reason, what we have never seems to be enough. Just in Canada and the US, we have 62,000 storage facilities. Think about that for a minute. Storage facilities, there's 62,000 of them, not storage lockers, but actual facilities. That number is actually more than the number of Starbucks, Walmarts, and McDonald's that we have combined. That's crazy, isn't it? I think it's easy to say that we love stuff, but the thing that's interesting is that the stuff that we have just isn't enough. The more stuff that we have, the more dissatisfied we seem to become. As we've just celebrated the Christmas season, it's crazy to find out how much waste we've actually produced over the holidays. Zero Waste Canada says that gift wrap and shopping bags contribute to about 545,000 tons of waste each year. That's kind of hard to imagine, isn't it? And this is just over the holiday season. Now, at the root of all of this is a monster called greed. Greed is something that we all struggle with in some form. But the tricky issue with the problem of greed is that people generally don't see themselves as greedy. It's a sneaky sin or a sneaky monster that creeps into our lives that we don't often notice. Here's the definition of greed: a selfish and excessive desire for more of something, such as money, than is needed. Now, before we dive in further, I want you to turn to the person next to you and share about a time that you felt or experienced greed. If you're watching this by yourself, write down some of your thoughts and share them with someone that you trust later. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to open your Bibles and turn to Luke chapter 12, verses 13 to 21. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at what Jesus tells us about greed. Here's what it says starting at verse 13. Then someone called from the crowd, "Teacher, please tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me." Jesus replied, "Friend, who made me a judge over you to decide such things as that?" Then he said, "Beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own." Verse 16, then he told them a story. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, "What should I do? I don't have enough room for all of my crops." Then he said, "I know, I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll have room for enough to store all the wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and say to myself, 'My friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry.'" Verse 20, and God said to him, "You fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything that you worked for?" Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but do not have a rich relationship with God. Jesus knows that greed is a huge problem for us because it gets tangled in with our primary issues. At the end of the day, we are selfish. Sin is the choice of self over God and over others. And in many, that is what greed really is. I choose myself over others because I deserve it. Like we mentioned before, the true challenge is that we don't often think that we are selfish, or we don't often think that we are greedy, and we would never say out loud, "I deserve it." But our actions often tell us a different story. Every single day, we make small choices over time that reinforce that reality. We have thoughts or excuses like such as this, like, "I worked hard for this," or "I deserve this," or "Other people don't work as hard as I do. But what if I still need or want this thing?" Greed, it's that feeling that makes you feel that you want to hold on to your possessions so tightly, not wanting to share with others, making life all about you and about what you want. It's this feeling that never leaves us truly satisfied. It makes us feel like we constantly want to say, "I want more." But Jesus, he calls us to live differently. Although culture is constantly telling us to make more money, to buy that bigger house, to buy that nicer car, to get that newer and greater thing, to do what makes you happy, to put yourself first. Jesus, he's actually calling us to live a life that's not focused on the self, but that's actually focused on others. Here's the truth. More things doesn't make us more happy. It's just not true. I was just in Uganda for a couple of weeks, and I learned this lesson all too well. When we went to visit this organization out there, it was an amazing time. We met kids that hardly had anything. They were living in situations of extreme poverty, many of them not even having access to clean drinking water. Yet, They were the most grateful and joyful children that I've ever met in my life. Author and pastor Rick Warren said these words: the more that you have, the more that you have to worry about. So how do you kill this monster of greed? How do we overcome this problem that's often in our lives? Well, Jesus offers us a solution. Jesus makes it clear that generosity is the only way to kill the monster of greed. Jesus in Matthew chapter 6 says these words: do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, your heart will be also. In order for us to overcome greed in our lives, we must become generous people. We must realize that all that we have doesn't actually belong to us anyways, but rather belongs to God. One of my friends modeled this so well to us just a few months ago. My wife and I, we have this friend named Kaylee, and she's basically gone off on this mission trip for 2 years. She's on this Mercy ship doing missions work in Southeast Asia. And she was in the process of selling all of her things before she left. However, there's one last thing that she wasn't sure what to do with. So we went out with her for dinner, and she had known that Kelly and I, Kelly being my wife, that we were having trouble navigating multiple jobs with only one vehicle. So when she met with us, she let us know that she felt that God was speaking to her about giving us her vehicle before she left. We were blown away, because at the end of the day, she could have made so much money from that, selling that car. But yet she chose to live a life of generosity and letting that blessing that was in her life be a blessing to somebody else. She said something that stuck with me, and I think about it all the time, and this is what she said. She said that on this side of heaven, that's what we're called to do. These things that we have are just things. We hold on to them loosely, and we trust that God will always provide us with what we need. Her example is something that has challenged me in my life and how I can grow in generosity. The reason that we are called to be generous is because Jesus himself was the most generous towards us. Jesus being God gave up his entire life to die on the cross and rise again for us to experience forgiveness and new life with him. So as we choose to follow Jesus, we become more like him. And when we choose to be generous, we are modeling after the generosity that Jesus shows us.